Look at how evil this dude looks.
Ew.
I don't blame him. Everything he's wearing is friggin' pointy. Put on a hoodie and calm down. Jeez.
Is it worth it?
What's up, nerds? You know the drill. It's review time. Corvus Glaive is a 3 energy 5 power card that reads on reveal, discard 2 cards from your hand to get +1 max energy. Overall impression of Corvus Glaive before we get into the details is he's awkward. I mean, there's a reason people don't really play Hellcal much anymore, even in Modok discard decks. But then again, there isn't anything like Corvus Glaive in the game, so maybe there's something there. But I will say, every time I've tried to theorycraft the Corvus Glaive and like make a deck on the SnapFan deck builder, it just always ends up feeling awkward, so I don't know. Alright, as far as the mechanics go on how Corvus Glaive will interact and work in the game, first note I have here is mostly think Hellcal. For example, if Apocalypse is your only card in your hand and you play out Corvus Glaive, he's only going to discard the Apocalypse once because there isn't a second card to discard in your hand. And the same applies to Swarm. If you have 1 Swarm in your hand and it gets discarded, you'll put 2 back in your hand, but Corvus Glaive won't target the new Swarms to be discarded. Essentially, Corvus Glaive will discard 2 cards simultaneously when he is played. And that leads into point 2. If you don't have 2 cards in your hand to be discarded with Corvus Glaive, you will not get the energy from his effect. Much like Werewolf by Night, if you don't move Werewolf, then he doesn't get the power bonus. The same thinking applies to Corvus Glaive. If Corvus Glaive doesn't discard 2 cards, just like Hellcal would discard 2 cards, you don't get that energy. And the last thing to note really, because Corvus Glaive honestly is kind of simple, just any questions you have about Corvus Glaive, just look at how Hellcal works. Question answered. But the last thing here is if he's triggered twice, you will get twice the amount of energy. But you also still have to meet the other prerequisites. Like if you play him on Kamartaj and you discard 4 cards from your hand, you will get +2 max energy. So really this card is just Electro and Hellcal put into 1 card, but everything on his text has to be required for you to get his full effect. So what's good about Corvus Glaive? The first thing I can think of is he's really unique. There isn't another card in the game that does anything like him. Yeah, there's cards that discard in the game, but this is the only card that exists that ramps you while also discarding. And unique cards that nothing can be substituted for them, sometimes they end up being decent because if a new deck is created with the card, you can't replace it. And that basically hops into our second point here. So for the second point here, it enables decks not possible before. So if anyone, like I said, it's been a little awkward brewing with Corvus Glaive and theory crafting with him. I just not finding a spot here. I have one place and we'll get to that later. But if someone does find a good deck that Corvus Glaive is awesome in, it's going to be solely because Corvus Glaive is the card that allowed that deck to happen. And the 2 examples I have here on point 2 is Ramp Hela and Agatha. Now it seems crazy, but Hela decks have always historically Hela decks have always been like targeted discard, like the ones using Lockjaw right now, or Modok discard, where you discard your whole hand and then you combo with Hela and Invisible Woman. Well, maybe Corvus Glaive will enable like a new type of deck that basically looks like a mashup of Sandman, Doctor Doom, Odin decks and Hela decks. Maybe that's a stretch, but it's possible. And then the second thing is Agatha. Actually, this is probably one of the best Agatha cards that has ever released. Agatha isn't great, and yeah, it's not the deck you want to play when you're trying to climb, but maybe Corvus Glaive is so good with Agatha that you could play Agatha and climb the ladder. Who knows? I don't know. And then the last point here is he's strictly better than Hellcal in pretty much any deck outside of the 2 examples I just laid out. Which is a positive. I mean, it's not a positive for older cards, but when a new card comes out and it's just downright better than some of the options those archetypes had before, it's a positive. But yeah, anytime you see Hellcal in any list, which isn't a whole lot, that's part of the reason why Corvus Glaive is a little bit, in my opinion. But anytime you see like a Modok deck that uses Hellcal as a backup, well, now Corvus Glaive is just going to go in there instead of Hellcal because he's just better. Yeah, it's not 8 power, but you get 1 energy, and I think that's, and you can play him out a turn earlier than Hellcow, so I think that's worth it when it comes to trade-offs. Now, the bad parts about Corvus Glaive. So point 1 here is you have better alternatives in discard, and this is still sort of related to the whole Hellcow thing. Those Modok discard decks, the ones that run Apocalypse and Swarm and stuff like that, they don't really need or use Hellcow. Some of them do as like a backup Modok, but for the most part, those decks are doing, I don't know, Gambit or Silver Samurai. You just have better alternatives in that specific archetype than Corvus Glaive. And also, using his energy isn't really something that deck can benefit from too much, because it's not really like you're not ramping out things at all in that deck. Maybe you get to play 1 extra card, which is worth something, but for the most part, you don't really need them in Apocalypse or Swarm type decks. And then the second bad thing about Corvus Glaive is he requires specific deck building to offset his non-targeted discard. The fact that he discards random stuff is super awkward. Like, what decks want something that discards multiple random cards and ramp? I don't know. Basically, my point is for him to be good, you have to make a deck that wants extra energy and is also okay with just random stuff being discarded from your hand. Can you think of that deck? I can't. We'll take a look at something potentially here in a minute, but that's a weird deck, and it doesn't exist right now, so that's definitely a downside to Corvus Glaive. Alright, on to the type of deck that might actually use Corvus outside of Agatha memes. Because, yeah, technically that's a deck, but anyways. So, like I said earlier in the video, it's a Sandman discard sort of deck. That's so weird to say. Shout out to No Big Deal from the Super Snap Bros. They do a podcast called How Can She Snap? And he actually brought that up during the last podcast I had with them. And at first I was like, you're an idiot. And then I was like, oh, actually, no, it's actually probably the best idea anyone's had for Corvus Glaive. So the idea here is you're only using Blade and Corvus to discard stuff from your hand. And so you use Corvus just like you would Electro, and if you discard your Hela, oh well, you're still playing like a ramp Sandman deck that can use Dr. Doom and Vision and Magneto and get those out early. Super good. But if you don't discard your Hela with Corvus Glaive, then Hela sort of serves as a secondary Dr. Doom, a much better Dr. Doom, actually. And I think that's the real power of this deck here. Just to explain some of the cards here, they seem a little weird, but Ronin is basically the biggest 5-drop you can play without any like weird drawback, especially considering we're running Maximus. Blade is here just to have, like, if we want to play Hela at some point in the game and we don't play Corvus Glaive, at least Blade will discard one thing and Hela will bring something back. And this list actually, it shows pretty well how I feel about Hela not being a combo card. Hela to me is like a RNG Dr. Doom. It's a value card, and that's what we're doing with Hela here. Example playline would be Nebula on 1, Maximus on 2 if you're lucky. On 3 you play Corvus Glaive, you discard a Ronin and a Magneto. You either have Hela in your hand, you got lucky and it didn't get discarded by Corvus, and you have Dr. Doom in your hand, so the next 2 turns could be Hela into Dr. Doom. That's a lot of power. That seems like an actually pretty good play. And like I said earlier, the strength here is if you discard Hela, oh well, you're still playing a ramp deck. And if you don't discard Hela, great, now you have a better Dr. Doom thanks to Corvus Glaive. Alright, on to the best part about Corvus Glaive this week is the Spotlight cache he's in. Now, as far as keys go, using keys to open for Corvus Glaive, I would say if you aren't near collection complete, or just if you're missing X23 or Gladiator at all from your collection, and you just sort of want to have Corvus Glaive, then it's totally worth it to use keys to open for Corvus Glaive, because X23 is an absolute staple, and I think always will be in Destroy decks. Gladiator is just a good card. Now, as far as tokens go, I think you should wait. He's a Series 5, he's 6k tokens, and that's for a card that like seems awkward and no one has put out like a good Theorycraft deck for it. There's no obvious homes for him. 6k tokens is way too much for a card like that. So if you like the idea of Corvus Glaive, you want to get him, I would still completely wait and see if he's not just a complete flop. and let content creators who can afford to spend 6k tokens on Corvus Glaive grab him and go check out their videos, see if Corvus Glaive is worth playing at all, and then make your mind up. Alright, that's the video. Thanks for making the story in the video. You guys are cool. Corvus Glaive is a weird card. Don't know if he's going to be good. I highly doubt it, but there's some potential there. Shout out to my sponsor, Into the AM. Check out the link in the description below for 10% off their site. All of it. Really cool graphic design stuff and the basics as well. If you like this hoodie, you can grab one also at my store. The link is in the description. Members of the channel get 10% off. But for now, that's it. Later, nerds. Put on a hoodie and calm down. Jeez.